people have the ability to make themselves smarter now. And, the brain is in many ways a muscle. It needs exercise. And you can make yourself stronger now because your muscles are definitely muscles. They need exercise. And yet most of us don't really go out of our way to do that all the time. We add new experiences in, but we do tend not to jump around and constantly try new things. There's obviously a threshold. You're much more likely to try stuff out if it's easier for you to do. But, if you say, oh, I'd like to go skiing one day, I'd like to go canoeing one day, I'd like to be a dragon one day, I think it would be awesome to be, king of England in the 1600s day. I'm going to go do a virtual war there. But, people would have those options. That's kind of like, from my perspective, what matters is to give people those options. But I don't know how often folks would actually take them. I think many people would choose to do 1,000 years of a lifestyle they liked, as opposed to 10 years or 100 different lifestyles more often than not.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to the show. My name is Bob Nickman. This is The Exploding Human. My guest today is Issac Arthur. Issac is the producer of a YouTube channel called Science and Futurism with Issac Arthur. More about that in a second. First, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of all my guests, little bio on myself, a donate button if you'd like to support the show through Patreon. Please do that. Much appreciated. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is called The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman, add with Bob Nickman. And there's a Facebook page, The Exploding Human Facebook page. So lots of places you can listen to the show. As I said, my guest today is Issac Arthur. Issac and I have a little bit in common in that we're both from Ohio. And we talk a little bit about that on the show. I thought he'd be more excited about that connection. But maybe he was, and I just didn't pick it up. Not that big of a deal. He is a font of knowledge in science, physics, and the future, so I was very honored to be able to speak with him. Issac was born to two physicists, and he was homeschooled from the age of 10 and dropped out of high school at the age of 12, and he got his GED at 16. In 2001, he graduated at the top of his class with a degree in physics from Kent State University and began to pursue a graduate degree in biophysics. Issac and I talk about the Fermi Paradox, which pay attention to this one. He's got some episodes on his channel about that, but we talked about that, so check that out. We talk about why we don't see any aliens. What's going on there? I want to see some aliens, but where are they? Then we get into some other stuff about the purpose of existence. Is there a purpose? What is it? And then we get to talk about a lot of more practical solutions to issues like the environment, solar power, graphene batteries, really cool stuff. So I have to say that it was a real brain exercise for me to keep up with him on this stuff, which I loved, and I think you'll love him too. And here he is. This is Issac Arthur. Good morning, Issac. Thank you for being on the show. I'm so happy to meet you. We had a little pre-talk, which I enjoyed already.
Thanks for having me on, Bob.
Yeah, I want to start with just a little background because I had read a little bit of your bio, and it said that your parents were physicists and you were homeschooled.
Well, actually, my parents met while they were majoring in physics, but my mom eventually changed her major over to computers, and I was homeschooled from about 10 on. So I did do some public schools too.
Okay.
And then I went to college later on.
Where was this?
Well, they met off in California. I don't even remember California, though I was born there. My mom's from Ohio, so we moved back here when I was a little kid. My father's passed away, so I got raised by my mom, my grandfather Arthur in Northeast Ohio, and that's been my home since for the last Oh, almost 40 years now. Wow. So,
Okay, well, I'm from Cleveland.
mhm.
That's where I grew up.
Just a little east there on Mentos where the family home was at, though I'm way out in Asheville County these days. So
I know exactly where you are. I have been there, and oh wow, that's interesting because I was telling you about my friend that I also interviewed who does a lot of future stuff, Marshall Brain. He is also from Ohio, so apparently, it's a hotbed of futuristic thinking.
as I say, back to the days of the Wright brothers, and of course the experiments that gave Einstein what he needed for special relativity got conducted right here in Cleveland too at Case Western. So it's been, I mean, flight and special relativity, very space, very NASA oriented, you know.
And also in Southern Ohio, this is a total left turn, funk music. Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, a hotbed of 70s funk music. I don't know why I know that because I like that music. I just wanted to throw that in.
I did not know that. So
Yeah.
I know some of the others. We were the place that invented the stoplight, I gather. There's a bunch of them.
Okay. So, and you went to Kent State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've been there too. So I know, so we have a little bit in common, and that it's probably
East Ohio, underappreciated, best place in the world to live. So
it's you can buy a house for like $9. I mean, it's fantastic.
oh yeah, well, not so much these days, but still pretty cheap area. Yeah, I mean the housing boom definitely hit this area too. Because I had to buy, I just bought a house earlier this year, so to move. I got married last year, so we ended up moving. But I would say it's still probably better. I think about how much I ended up paying, and then my friends would tell me about them. You know, oh yeah, I just got a house, and they say the price like, oh my god. Wow, I'm so glad I live in a place where it is much, much cheaper to buy land and houses. You know?
It's so reasonable. I know my sister lives there. She bought an entire house and paid cash for it. It was just, I'm like, how did you do that? All right, so let's get into some stuff here, because when we start talking about the future and computers and AI, I think a lot of people get a little overwhelmed with, I want to use the word fear, because we don't understand exactly what's happening. Although, you know, we're sort of melding with computers in this odd way. I mean, I'm married to my iPhone, you know, a big chunk of the day. That's the simplest version that I think people can understand. But there was something you were talking about in the Fermi Paradox episode I listened to, which was the idea of things getting smaller and faster, which is what the phones have done with computers. And that is seemingly where we're headed futuristically, even as a species in a couple of ways that you mentioned. Can you talk about that first? And then Absolutely. It'll probably prompt some other questions from me.
I think that was our first episode, the Fermi Paradox, that great big question of where all the aliens are at, and the universe is, you know, billions of years old and billions of light years across, is kind of always that question of where are they? And one of the things that people suggest sometimes is that it might be that people just keep miniaturizing, that instead of going off to space and colonizing new worlds to get more land and territory to grow in, that either a civilization just stops growing, or that it grows, but it grows downward, that it grows ever more compact. And that's been a very popular suggestion, especially in the kind of context of technological singularities and mind uploading, and the idea that artificial intelligence or some post-human or transhuman state might be what civilizations move towards. Trans-alien, of course, for other places. And then the notion is, how fast can you actually run a human brain? How compact can you make it? And it is shocking, because on the one hand, we say, well, you can keep shrinking down how small a brain is, in theory anyway, until you get probably to the atomic scale, maybe even beyond that somehow. But at some point, you do finish growing into that, so you'd want to expand out into the universe. But we found ourselves thinking about is, for us, a journey to another solar system is a thing of centuries. Even if you manage to find a way to go at the speed of light, it would be, you know, years to just the nearest place. But for them, it might actually feel like a lot longer, just because our brains right now operate at a scale of about the speed of sound, even a little bit lower. But the speed of light, what we could do with, you know, something that was a computer-based brain, that's 10 million times faster. That is that much faster. It is hugely faster. And you just have this scale where you could build a brain the size of a planet that only has many neurons in it as a human. And if it was operating at the speed of light, it would still work just as fast as a human brain. But we could do something even more compact than the human brain and operate at that speed, so that people that had such brains might experience time, 1 billion times faster even than we do. In which case, that voyage to another solar system might feel like billions of years. And in that context, why I don't normally like the miniaturization option for why we don't encounter alien civilizations, that kind of makes sense. It might just be too much for them to buy into. There's other worlds out there, but they're a billion years away for them, and again, there's a lot of pros and cons to that particular standpoint. There's many different variations it might have, but it's kind of an example of how we try to look at the Fermi Paradox to just explain why it is that we don't see anybody, because a popular answer you often hear for the Fermi Paradox is, well, maybe they find our planet too boring. And I say, Kansas, the place that even more than Ohio is notoriously boring, gets 7 million visitors a year. Last I checked, it might be more now. You don't tell me in a universe of all those planets that are inhabited that they're not going to have at least a few people come visit our boring world. And if the answer is, well, there's not that much life, so it's a long trip for them too, then the thought would be, we can't be that boring if there's only a little bit of life. That'd be like going and visiting the one other oasis island in your sea, So we tend to find that most of the answers that we like for the Fermi Paradox either have to be why aliens really aren't around at all, or why they just would not have occasion to come visit us because it seems like they would really want to, because we would.
Yeah, well, you'd think that any civilization from another place would want to see something different. Whether, who's to say what's boring? If it's different, how is it boring?
We have folks who make their entire life study on ants. So this is like, well, we might just be ants then. Well, most people don't care about ants, but there are thousands of people who it's their life.
I used to do a joke about Kansas saying I can't go there because I have a fear of wits. Very flat. Okay, now here's what I'm this is underneath it for me. There's two assumptions going on with this idea of expanding and growing as a species, either outward or inward, smaller. One is that our planet is doomed and we need to figure out a new way to live. And the other one is that the way we're living now is we're dissatisfied with it. We're constantly dissatisfied and we want something else. Mm-hmm. And are these something else's really what we want? And the other, here's a third part. There's an a desire to eliminate struggle. And as human beings, isn't that, and I'm just rhetorically asking that, isn't that something that is part of being human that we need? And why are we trying to get rid of it?
It's a wonderful question. I have no idea. When it comes to things like purpose and why we exist and if we have free will, I like to think the answer is yes, but it's so hard to really kind of, from a scientific standpoint, how do you dissect that problem? And I do not like to do the ultra reductionist approach that says something like, well, everything inside your brain is just chemicals. And I say, well, that's true. And that's exactly as true, potentially. There might be other aspects, but that's exactly as true as saying, well, Shakespeare is just ink on a page. And I said, well, that has nothing to do with what Shakespeare is. It just happens to be how he wrote it down and how some people see it. Your brain has a substrate it's on. It's neurons, it's chemicals, it's biology. We don't really know much about what our purpose or what our goals or existence could be, because they might be, that's the question for thousands of years. But we do know, based on what people seem to want, is that, and I really have no idea how they discover this. They say we are more stressed out nowadays than our ancestors were. And I said, well, how can that be? Even the people who are worst off in this country have a lifestyle that is better than all but the most wealthy noblemen of the past. And yet we seem to be more stressed out. And some say it's because we have more options, because we have a bigger sight of the future. There's more decisions to make, and decisions are what kill people, right? It's a horrible thing, but even something as minimal as trying to decide what breakfast cereal you're going to have, and it's the value of having a brand name you affiliate to, is you don't have to decide. It's nice to have 100,000 options at the store, but it's also nice not to have to think about each one individually and just go back in there and grab the box you've loved all the time. And another day you can try something else. It's nice to have the options. And so I think what we're seeing with humans is that we have a lot of decisions to make, and I could actually see civilizations kind of stopping on their push forward just because life is getting so stressful just from all they see. But there does seem like there should be workarounds to that sort of problem. I don't want to say that they're going to become the antidepressants, anti-anxiety pill civilization, but there should be ways to get around the inability to make decisions. So I don't really like that one as a Fermi paradox. The other one is, do we need to get out to other planets so we don't, because we're going to wreck all this, we need a new place to live. And the problem is that if you nuke this planet with every nuke we ever built times 100, it would still be easier and cheaper to rebuild Earth than to terraform Venus or Mars.
Okay.
If you blew off every last ounce of atmosphere and the oceans, it would still be easier to re-terraform Earth than to do Mars or Venus. So all the concerns people have is like, well, we're just going to go to another planet. In order to terraform these places and make them livable, we actually need to have a better control of efficiency and ecology than we do right now. We're all the baseline zone, and we could probably do it right now, but it wouldn't be the bestest job in the world, and certainly not with our modern practices. So, species certainly are wise to get all their eggs out of one basket and not be on the same planet, the same solar system. But at the same time, you can't escape yourself. You can never escape yourself by going into other worlds. You can just escape your neighbors, which sometimes helps, but mostly tends to bring your problems with you. You go and make your new settlement, your promised land, and a generation later, you got all the same personality types you previously had because they came with you in your DNA. They're in the blood, So
yeah.
You just got to wait for them to regrow in a couple generations, and they'll be right back.
Well, I love that idea that it'd be easier to rebuild a completely nuked planet and to take a long trip somewhere and try to figure out doing Earth somewhere else. Yeah. And so here's the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and let me see if I can word this properly. This melding of computers and artificial intelligence with humans, mm-hmm. and that we're going to become that combination. We're going to, downloading computers into our brains, maybe even taking our brains and uploading it into a new biological carrier or not. But really what it comes down to, it seems like we're going for pure thought without any problems. So if we get to the point where we're just experiencing, like through AI and virtual reality, all these options, mm-hmm. that we can live and experience and even feel, if we're able to do that, and then we don't need the vehicle of a body. Is that something that people are really wanting?
There are a lot of what people want sometimes and what they should actually be aiming for are not always the same thing. As Henry Ford used to say, if you ask people what they want, they say, build me a faster horse. People say, well, my body causes me pain or inconvenience or makes me do stupid things. And so I don't want any of those. And say, well, what exactly, first, are you still you if you start removing those components of you? And obviously, to some degree, the answer is yes. And also no, that's the age-old question of change. But the other aspect of that is basically just saying, if I put myself entirely into a virtual substrate, I'm on a computer and I live only in virtual worlds, my body can be whatever I want to be, though now I have to rewire it so that it works to control this new artificial body with different limbs on it, for instance. Or I have a cyborg body I can download myself into, or 1,000 of them that are all different, right? And I'd say the aspect of that, although I find that as creepy as most people probably do when I phrase it that way, but the idea there that would be encapsulated is you have more options. It's not that you wouldn't have a body, though, because your body is essentially the thing by which you interact with this universe around you. And if you're in some other universe, a virtual one or whatever it is, you presumably still need a body to do that with. Now, that body might be a purely on-the-site telekinetic kind of existence where you just control things, but where are your eyeballs at? Where you have to have some place where your light's coming into. It might not be a physical eyeball, it might be wormholes or something like that go back to your central processing system. But you have to have places where your senses are coming in from. You have to have places where you are impacting things. And so there's going to be some equivalent of a body no matter what you do, even if it might be very, very ethereal compared to what we tend to think of it as now. And I think, again, that for a lot of folks, it's not the idea that they don't have a body anymore. It's that their body as it is in some way not what they want it to be. And I don't think that's necessarily where you want to be trying to go and trying to figure out what your future as a civilization is, do we want more options? That's probably true. Although on the same hand, with our serial example a few minutes ago, it's nice to have a million options out there if you want to go be a dragon in a virtual universe for a few days. But at the end of the day, it's nice to have a brand name affiliation that you have to make decisions about, and that would seem to be human, for most folks.
So, but also, if you're going to do all these options and you want to experience these options, and there's a speed increase with computers, couldn't you just experience all the options in like a couple of hours and then you're done?
Winwinwin, he's the sci-fi writer who's probably most associated to this kind of post-human, transhuman singularity stuff. He had a comment that was in one of those, which was technological singularities, the computers that kind of like take off and rapidly increase, smarter and smarter at each moment, right? In his book series, have an average half-life of 8 minutes before they just disappear and nobody knows they're committing suicide, jumping off into a new universe or what. It's just that bam, they're gone. There's a subjective experience, of course. If you're running a million times faster or a million times slower, whatever it is, your time is still the same, and it only matters if you're interacting with the world around you. If you're in a virtual world with other virtual people who hang out there, it probably isn't going to matter to you that it's been a century inside, but only been like 10 minutes outside, or vice versa. Because we do talk about how to keep civilizations running on my show a lot, like after all the stars are gone, and that requires a shift to a very slow and hyper efficient existence, where a trillion years goes by to experience a day, but you have a trillion years, so your subjective life experience is still trillions upon trillions of years in that particular scenario. When we talk about this change of who people are and experience on these things, one caveat I like to put on that is, we always talk about, if you could make yourself smarter, you would. Well, people have the ability to make themselves smarter now. And, the brain is in many ways a muscle. It needs exercise. And you can make yourself stronger now because your muscles are definitely muscles. They need exercise. And yet most of us don't really go out of our way to do that all the time. We add new experiences in, but we do tend not to jump around and constantly try new things. There's obviously a threshold. You're much more likely to try stuff out if it's easier for you to do. But, if we say, I'd like to go skiing one day, I'd like to go canoeing one day, I'd like to be a dragon one day, I think it would be awesome to be, king of England in the 1600s day. I'm going to go do a virtual world there. But people would have those options. That's kind of like, from my perspective, what matters is to give people those options. But I don't know how often folks would actually take them. I think many people would choose to do 1,000 years of a lifestyle they liked, as opposed to 10 years or 100 different lifestyles, more often than not.
Probably, yeah. There's certain things, like you were saying, certain things are in our DNA, and we just gravitate toward them, with a level of intuition and passion that is just sort of there. And we don't, I don't know why I like the things I like necessarily.
Early upbringing, I come from a family of geeks. My grandfather had a gigantic collection of sci-fi. I'm literally named after Isaac Arthur, the sci-fi writer. I know exactly why it is that I love science fiction. I grew up watching Star Trek, as a kid, and Doctor Who and all that. So that early childhood definitely has a factor on that. But I try to get into other areas just kind of to stimulate interest. And sometimes they can, sometimes they don't, for reasons I know or reasons I don't. Some of it's biological, some of it's early upbringing. But of course, we are not limited to those options. People can say, and to use the example again, go into a virtual world and find out what it's like to be a dragon flying around, burning down villages one day. If we give folks those options, that would be to me the place we want to aim, as opposed to enforcing those choices on people either.
So I guess first it'll be more like entertainment, like these new Apple glasses that are supposedly coming out to experience virtual reality
therapy. Yeah. Escapism, I think, would be a lot of it too.
It really is. Yeah. I was just, when you mentioned Star Trek, there was that one episode where there were brains in jars, and they were thought, but they wanted to have the Star Trek crew do the actual stuff because they didn't have bodies. And it was very important to them to make them, kiss and do combat and different things. That was one of my favorite episodes because you think this is an advanced civilization, but it's not.
Yeah, in many ways it very much was, and in other ways it very much was not. And that's a thing we should remember ourselves. We are not like our ancestors. I think we are genuinely nicer people by and large, but that's a product of being raised inside a civilization that treats that way. We're biologically identical to the ones who used to go around beating people's heads in with stones for kicks. There's not that much of a difference to us. And the Lord of the Flies analogy, it doesn't take that long for you to go right back to that state. Civilization is something you got to work at. And, one concern we tend to have with things like technological singularities and with better tech is that civilization is glued together by shared mutual need. Part of that need is biological too. We do actually need to be around each other, but a lot of it is not, right? For folks who are, very introverted or very antisocial, if they have a really good 3D printer or their own power supply, their own spaceship, whatever it is, or their own house and property they can just live on and not need to ever leave the house or even interact with anyone else because they got a beautiful virtual landscape in there, do they just come off from civilization entirely? And we could be talking in many cases about one civilization where people have effective immortality. They have very long lives. What does somebody look like? And I don't want to pick on anyone, but the person who plays video games in their basement all the time, that stereotype, what does that person look like after 1,000 years of transhumanism living in a virtual world, where they just don't ever really have to deal with society at that point in time? Now, of course, we don't mean physically, but, they might look quite horrifying if they've been eating chips the entire time. But they also might look like, a bodybuilder too, because the same kind of technology that extend life might also make it very easy to be, in muscular perfection and health. But what's the mind look like on that person? We do have a certain biological desire for each other's company, but we're also all touchy too. And, we also all have a certain tendency to want to escape from the world too. I never really like the term extrovert or introvert because for so many of us, it's both, right?
Yeah.
And I think for almost everybody, it's both. We all like all me time and all, socializing. If a society doesn't need each other for anything other than that component though, how glued together does that society stay? And then how glued together does its civilizing norms? Who's the person actually around saying you have to act better than this? And the person says, no, I don't. I can go off and hang out with only that echo chamber of people who agree that whatever, thing we'd find atrocious these days is perfectly fine. And if they are not doing something to a fellow human, that might not be a concern for people to say, well, you can't do that anymore. And I think there's a TV show, Westworld, that plays that idea a lot too. What would you do if you could do whatever you want to other people and not be punished for it in any way, even by social stigma? And that can get kind of horrifying because that's kind of as well, everyone's got a little bit of an angel and demon inside themselves, which one's coming out to visit today, and there's no restrictions. So there are ways a civilization could fall apart as a victim of its own success. And that's certainly something we've worried about for a long time in cultures. They might turn hedonistic and decadent, for instance, but technology and technological singularities just kind of add a new flavor to that, I think.
That was an interesting idea of like having it so good that we destroy ourselves that way.
Yeah.
I was, it really does come down to what do we want for ourselves as a species. And, and I want to talk, the idea of when we think about space, a lot of people think of it as there's nothing there between the solid objects. I don't see it that way, but I think there is the thing that's there. There's more of that than there is anything else. Mm-hmm. That some people call it plasma. Let's just say it's another form of the solid liquid gas. And there's this other thing that certainly light can travel through. So there's something there that it travels through because we can see planets and we can see stars and we can see that. There's also, I think, sound travels through that. And I think there is, and I'm not a scientist of any kind, but the idea that the universe is made up of vibration. I think that's probably the best word because both of those things sound like they're all kind of vibrations. And how are we connecting to that? I mean, when I know that there was a great, and I don't have the exact quote, but Einstein said something about we dance to dance to a strange and distant tune, something like that, intoned by a mysterious piper.
Mm-hmm.
That feeling, and that I'm going to say knowing. I think there's a knowing to that we all have that. And isn't that what we come from, and that we're trying to go back to, in a sense? Even when we die, that's where we go. This is not actually physics. This is something else, I think. But there is a physics aspect to vibration.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of folks with string theory, there's that aspect to that, though I'm not a big string theory fan. And we usually would say that there's the entire, quark sea that goes on in the vacuum of space. There's this underlying state where there's constantly things popping in and out of existence. And this, as best as we can tell, seems to be true. There's constantly stuff popping in and out of existence and right back out again. And it's incredibly intense in terms of how much energy there is there. And we don't even know for sure how much there is there, because we disagree by many orders of magnitude on what the theories say. But the other aspect of that is kind of that other classic is we all feel a certain, compulsion towards certain things that just seem naturally right, or things like that. And philosophers have been talking about that for a long time, as have theologians, of course, too. And, we don't really know for sure the answer to that. The overly reductionist biological view, and I would say overly reductionist because most biologists don't actually share it, but it's a popular view to subscribe to them, is that all this stuff is just wired into your head as very basic collections of very minor evolutionary advantages. I've always thought that, again, that's overly reductionist, but whatever all purpose is, and you could go to the other side of things and just go the straight spiritual of, what Paul said, and I think Corinthians, don't quote me on that, was that these truths are written on your heart kind of idea. Mm-hmm. You know what is morally right or what your purpose is. It's built into you. And of course, to some degree, the biologists would agree with that statement. So I think we all tend to feel that there is something called a purpose. This might be a lie, right? This might be something we all share as a common misbelief. I hope not. But to say there are certain things that if there is no purpose to existence, right? If we all living in basically the cosmic horror subgenre of H.P. Lovecraft or Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Maybe it is better not to know, because one thing science does say is that whether free will exists or not, the belief in free will, or at least maybe not the philosophical concept, but called center of loci or something like that, the belief that you have the ability to change your life around you, that you're the main player, that what happens to you is under your control by and large. You can't control what's going to storm tomorrow or not, but that you can really impact your own life in a big way. That belief is always shown to be one of the top 3 or 4 things that controls how well you do in life, both in terms of your personal stress levels and in terms of what other people would measure as your success, by either prestige or prosperity, or whichever. And I think that's probably a thing to keep in mind. I don't know if we really have a real deep purpose and where it comes from. I'm not sure that it being biologically based would be any really different than saying it was being made on the computer simulator from above, or something more spiritual specifically. But I know that it's advantageous not to get rid of that belief. So we did an episode looking at that one time. And I think that what you would probably see with civilizations is there's this theory that they get smart if they not be able to lie themselves about free will existing, if that was a lie, and then they just, fall over and collapse, right? But I think that you'd instead say is, if it was a lie, you'd find the civilization always evolved towards people who were better at lying to themselves about it. So whoever was, you get the fall where 90% of the population says, none of this is real, and they're like, this is all a lie. Purpose does not exist. There is nothing, and I'm going to go die now. And 10% says, I don't believe that, and they're still around afterwards, and they just get better at convincing themselves they have a purpose. And some might argue that is basically human civilization, that we've gotten very good at that, because this purpose versus non-purpose question is not in any way new to us, right? I would, of course, argue that no, purpose is a very real thing. That morality is a very real thing, that there is such thing as right and wrong. But yeah, I can't prove that. I can't prove that at all. Nor, to be honest, am I interested in trying, because I don't see any possible gain to me in finding out that I'm wrong. So probably sounds like a non-scientific answer, but it's kind of like, well, can you ever prove that the universe around you is real? Well, under things like simulation theory or things like that, you can't actually prove it. Someone could come and show you, no, this is a fake reality. But there's the two-fold answer, and it's very similar to Pascal's wager. It says, is the universe real or not, or dream or not, whatever it is? And do I believe that or not? All I get to control is whether I believe it or not. So I get this matrix, this 2x2 matrix of, is the universe real or not? And do I believe it or not? And the thing you don't control is what actually is the truth, but you get to control what you do believe. And I don't see any advantage to believing the universe is not real if it turns out to be real, whereas I don't see any harm in believing it is real if it turns out it isn't. So that's kind of that extreme decision matrix thing on things like free will or purpose,
Well, there are certain ways of believing that are very helpful. There's that old saying, if God did not exist, it would be necessary for man to invent him. That's kind of what you're talking about. And
I think that was very much, I think that might have been Nietzsche, but somebody had said that certainly. And I can see the rationale for that. But, I like to leave the doors open on everything, but I always ask myself on a question like that, where civilizations are, what's the benefits then of coming to believe otherwise? And all that matters is their perspective, not what truth is. It's just harder to hold a false perspective for a long time. So if it turns out there is no such thing as purpose and scientifically provable that it's not, they may eventually kind of give into that trap. But you think there'd always be a chunk of the population that firmly didn't believe that. And, they could just put the blinders back on and they presumably get better and better at, concealing that truth with time. So
I'm loving talking to you because I feel my brain doing push-ups. This is great stuff, man. I don't get to talk to people that know this stuff the way you know it. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Where are we going as a civilization? And what would you like to see? What would you like to see that is existing now that we can use to our benefit the most? Particularly in terms of environmental issues. I think that's a big part of it. And then the way that we treat each other.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was writing up an episode recently on the future of solar power, and I always like to think of like solar was one of my examples of technology that had a horrible rollout because basically, from the strictly science angle, there's so much advantage to using solar if you can get it working. But for the longest time, it really wasn't there. And people forget we've been improving engine technology the whole time too. So we've been working at that for a century and we've still been working at it. So we keep making those more and more efficient as well. And so solar wasn't really seeming very attractive. And rather than just telling people by and large, you got to be patient with us on this when you have to keep putting real money into real usage of it too, and we'll get there, which it has basically finally just done in the last few years, or is very close to the next couple, depending on how you want to look at the numbers. But instead we say, no, you're evil and guilty. And there's one thing that doesn't really do well is we tell people, you say you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. Humans will go to vinegar, but you're not allowed to actually spit in their face while they're going to say, enjoy drinking this. And I think with a lot of folks, we basically told them, and this happened with a lot of environmental causes, because for so many people who were doing them, it was more important to them to be up on the soapbox and be seen as the good guy and tell other people why they were bad, than just try to convince them, here are some very reasonable steps we need to be looking into. It doesn't necessarily have to be this exact thing, but if you got something better to suggest, but we need to be shifting in this direction to help us figure out the best way to do this, as opposed to do as we say or you're evil. So solar is kind of one of those examples of that technology that rolled out a lot like that. And I think we'll be we're probably at the price point where people can start using that depending on where they live in the country economically right now. But if we're not, we're soon going to be there. But it's going to be a couple of decades before most people believe we are, just because it's got that bad taste of false expectations to it,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the big one I'd like to see people kind of shift to in the next decade or two, is just this kind of notion that there is no inherent reason why you can't be very industrialized, very productive, and indeed very prosperous, and not also be ecologically sound or environmental. And not that those things won't ever be in competition, but this happens with everything. Every ecosystem, be it technology or the more natural normal kinds, has a constant dynamic shift and competition between what's working out and what's not. And that's what we have to deal with now, is that we're not adjusting to one single new standard. We're going to be in a constant moving slide of what's the best idea at the time in terms of what we want to be doing ecologically. And so we don't really want to set our roots down on what we thought was the best idea 10, 15 years ago, because that's changed. Nor should we ever be kind of focused on the idea that we need to go back to a pristine earth, because there's no such thing. Earth was constantly changing. What was a forest a decade ago, 3 years later, some beaver comes down to, knocks it over, and it's a lake. What was the dynamic between two species for centuries gets shifted by a third wandering in. So that constant chaotic change is something humans have done very well at adapting to. And we need to start thinking of how we integrate that into the ecology in a way that is sustainable, but not as something that's like separate. We're not talking about a future of, concrete everywhere and big glass and steel skyscrapers like people tended to envision in the 80s so much as the future of humanity. We were talking about something that's just smarter, more technologically feasible, and more integrated in the ways that work best for us, both as a planet and as a species.
When I've looked at solar, it's just like economically doesn't make sense to me yet for my own home anyway. But I get the feeling like it's going to happen pretty quick. It's going to accelerate to the point where it's going to be really the only way to do it. And where even the power companies are advocating for solar now, which I couldn't believe.
We know it's getting there, and the key thing on a lot of that is going to be, when something's genuinely economically viable in and of itself, you usually don't have to sell people too hard on it. It's still not quite to that point for all applications, but it's getting there. And all it would take is some better batteries, which is unrelated technology, like the graphene batteries we look at potentially being on the market very soon. Or, just that one little shift in production cost of one thing that drops it 20 more percent, and bam, it's good to go.
Yeah.
Although the other side of that is other technologies are constantly improving too. So, we're not just working on, nor should we just be working on solar. We'll continue to work at how we improve fossil fuel usage, including things like methane or natural gas. We continue to improve how we do hydroelectricity and wind, as we should be. But, we can get 10% better with solar next year. We might get 8 or 9% better with the ones we're also using already. And so we still don't use solar just yet because the others improved almost as much. And, that's an interesting aspect to keep in mind on these things. And we do just keep getting better at everything. And there was never, ever a static environment, nor should there be.
You look very happy when you were talking about the possibilities. And I was glad to see that there's a positive look at possibilities for improving, these kinds of things. You mentioned something, though, that I had never heard of. I've heard of graphene, but did you say a graphene battery?
Graphene batteries, yeah.
Okay, let's explain what graphene is first, because I didn't know about it till a couple years ago, and then talk about the battery.
Graphene is what we call a two-dimensional material, but basically graphene is made out of carbon atoms as one of the allotropes or substances you can make out of just carbon. Diamond is one, coal is one, and graphite is one. And graphite is essentially graphene in very tiny little patches. It's like confetti, right? We try to go ahead and make one big wide sheet of these graphene molecules, which is tricky to do. And this has some surprisingly amazing properties, some which we wouldn't think of. It's an amazing conductor of electricity. It's an amazing thermal conductor. It appears to potentially have superconducting properties. And it just seems to have all these wonderful electrical and physical properties, one of which is being super strong in a tensile sense. We say a sheet of stuff. If a Kleenex sheet was the easy thing to tear apart, this would be the extreme other end of the spectrum. This stuff would be like Wolverine's adamantium claws to try to tear apart. You could slice it with a knife, though. And so it has great interest for things like space elevators. Nor is it unique. It was the first one we discovered of these 2D materials, but we have some other ones like stannine, which is the same thing, only made out of tin atoms instead of graphene. And it might have some better properties. There appear to be a lot of these 2D materials, or quasi-2D for some that are kind of more bent. That's a whole different topic for another time. But the graphene seems to be the captain average that's of all these materials that's a little bit good at everything, but which we expect some of the others will be a little bit better. So it might turn out that you're doing stannine batteries instead of graphene. But at the moment, because it's this really flat conductive sheet, doing layer above layer above layer of those, this is basically how you build a battery, the multiple layers and sheets of the dielectric. The anode or the cathode, as you will. And that's has the option to be a battery that might be 5 or 6 times more energy dense than modern batteries. I mean, the same size battery, a lithium-ion battery in your phone would last 5 or 6 times longer, which is great, right? Which would be amazing for things like solar. But the other aspect of that is that, two other aspects. One, graphene being made of carbon is a lot more common and cheap than lithium, if we can make it cheap, though. And two, it charges really quickly. Right now, your phone takes an hour to charge with a fast charger, and that's way better than batteries used to do. Imagine if it really could just charge up in a minute. And if it could discharge a minute too. And if it could discharge a minute, that makes it useful for all sorts of things like potentially weapons, because you can't really do electrical guns, for instance. They're too slow to discharge. But it means you can actually recharge your electric car at the gas station in a period of time that's not really any longer or shorter than you couldn't take to fuel it up, which would be so nice because especially if you're using something like solar or nuclear. I love nuclear for this as your power base instead of fossil fuels for charging cars. The big restraint is really that it takes a while to charge them. And that means they are a niche application compared to what we like to have them now, because none of us want to spend an hour recharge our car, though it could be like, well, I do it for a few hours now. I take my 30-minute break to have some food and coffee. But we still want the ability to charge that thing up in a few minutes. And we could do 5 or 10 minutes. That's fine. We have to wait that long at the gas station anyway. But, we want that fast charge. We do not want our phone to need to be plugged in for 30 or 40 minutes while we can't use it, or need to be charged multiple times a day. And so that's where the graphene battery comes in and helps. That would also help, obviously, with solar too, where it's been a cloudy day and now it's nighttime. Where's my energy?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. Somebody was telling about an application for it. You can put it on any type of manufactured good and track that from the factory to the truck to the warehouse to the store to the person that bought it to the person that stole it from the person that bought it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like when they laser and subscribe things into diamonds, because we can make diamonds now. You can make them in a microwave, though not really your home microwave, and more of a commercial one. They are easy enough to make for the same reason that graphene's easy to make, but we inscribe things in them so it knows they're fake. But it's a thing that keep in mind is these little tiny technological changes, like the paperclip, that are big world benders and changers in their own right, but which we never really see in the sci-fi things. And one of those is that ability to put some very tiny RF code on a package that's just cheap and easy to put on there and unique, and maybe it's got some 100-digit unique number, whatever it is. It's there. It's instantly, easily scannable. And so we know where everything is when we want to. And so I know exactly where my package is at. I know exactly where the other packages are at that I'm supposed to be trying to ship out of my warehouse. And I know where I put that copy of my keys from way back in the day, or that book I've been looking for, or any number of other things. And with that comes other advantages too, like produce, the little label on it that says the price tag is now also the date and other things on it. So it goes into your fridge scans that and says, oh, these strawberries with data, compiled from that says these are only good for 3 days in the refrigerator. I need to let you know that you eat them now. In the next day or so, they're going to go bad. It's like send a little note to your phone saying, don't forget to eat strawberries today. Here's some recipes that involve strawberries. Or those are the tiny little life-changing things that make a big difference. And, we actually waste around 1/4 to 40% of our food. And most of that actually takes place in the household, though a lot of it's, leaving the fields, going through distribution and grocery stores. Think about, we always worry about how we're going to feed people. Well, when 1/4 to 40% of our food is just being wasted because of bad logistics, not because people are being gluttons or wasteful in themselves, but because they got a half gallon of milk and that's how those things come. And they forgot it was going bad even, there's no gluttony or waste there. It's just inefficiency.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you can feed, 40 to 25% more people because of little tiny changes like that. You don't need one extra inch of farmland, and yet you'd have it because you'd find those same kind of efficiencies that you could fix at a farm level too. We waste fertilizer because we accidentally sprayed over the same, foot of where we switch rows, and we spray the same area twice we go by. And yet one that's very accurately on GPS and controlled wouldn't do that. It'd be down to the millimeter accurate in terms of its fertilize, whichever it was doing for that. Those little tiny changes in efficiency, which is what artificial intelligence, basic artificial intelligence offers us. Doesn't have to be very smart at all. Those are what are going to make a lot of the big game changes economically in the century to come.
I love that use of technology. That's where I get excited when I think of those kinds of things.
And I love it because they're non-controversial.
Yeah, it's so non-controversial. It's just like it's win-win-win all across. I interviewed a guy not that long ago, and one of the things he said is that there are 40 million acres of lawns in the United States. 40 million acres. that is a lot of crops and food sources that could be used. And that's really as simple as it's two things. It's changing a belief system that a lawn is something you need in front of your house or your backyard. And two, that it's economically, feasible and easy to do to convert that. And it becomes, it's a really interesting idea when you think about how much land that is.
It's easy to do them. They look kind of pretty, but biggest is the easiest. No one ever says, I got this big green lawn, and that in itself makes me have the prettiest lawn. Polyculture and that kind of basic things we need besides farmland, the places where all of our pollinators go to live, all of our soil microbes are at, all of our insect colonies, those can live in someone's beautifully manufactured lawn and garden, right? And again, the robots come out and clip that every day for you instead. That's a very easy thing to do. But then they get to the point where they're also the ones doing your basic landscaping too. Everyone would love to have that polycultural yard. The little cove of trees over here, the nice little herb garden over there, the little thorn valley there. All of us would love to have that over the big green postage stamp, right? But that doesn't mean you have to lose the postage stamp either. Maybe the little robot lawn is one that brings the sheep by carefully, controlling it, not even your problem to eat that grass, or to cut it and feed that grass to them, and integrates the manure into the ground without you having to accidentally worry about stepping on or smelling through your window. There's going to be 1,000 different ways that might go, and I don't know what they will. If I did, I'd be a billionaire patenting all the little minor variations. But you can smell or taste the future there, and it is probably going to be polycultural lawns because it looks prettier, and there's so many options for it too. It's like you have to pick the one green postage stamp. It still lets you have a lot of that big, beautiful lawn because you're carefully integrating that into things. And they do serve a purpose as a food source even, and it will be more ecological and more efficient. So why not go for something that's prettier, that's also more efficient and cheaper? But we need to have the tech there for us, and that's coming along. The first stage is the Roomba that goes by and slices your lawn up for you. The stage after that is the smart house that basically says, oh, this tree needs pruning. We'll call in the drone that will prune that tree, which might not even be something you own. It might just be from the local rental thing. It drives on by and prunes your tree for you. That's that smart house, the smart community. These things will roll out with time. That I suspect is going to look a lot like the 1980s with all the home smart apps we're getting. It'll look like 1980s computers where none of them were compatible. None of them used anything approaching the same software. And most of them eventually ended up as very expensive paperweights for holding the door open. But we got there eventually.
I had a Roomba and I used it like 3 times and it was like, nah, this is not, I'd rather just get a broom.
I have one. It was a wedding gift. I still use it. And my studio is on the lower floor of my house, and it's up on the second floor, and it will come rumbling overhead sometimes. I occasionally have to run upstairs to shut it off. I'm recording that day because it's not that it's loud, but it's definitely present. It sounds like a toddler running around up there. But it does definitely cut down on it helps, right? It's less vacuum, it's less clean, it's less dust in the house. And if you got allergies, air filters and regular vacuuming and dusting is your key to less misery. But it's the stage one stuff. And that first couple of generations of technology is always very niche or clunky or both.
Yeah, it was battery changing and cleaning the filter. It was like it's almost as much work as it was more work to me than sweeping. But that's just me.
And then there's some people hate that task, like the dishwasher. It comes along. You see early dishwashers, see early cell phones. Back in the days, the only people had them were doctors and drug dealers in the 80s. Looked like a gigantic radio you had to kick around and carry out.
Big shoebox. So, all right, let's plug your podcast because it is excellent. That I listened to 2 or 3 episodes, and it is if you're interested in this stuff, listeners of mine, this is the guy you want to listen to. It's really fantastic. What's the name of it again?
Science and Futurism with Issac Arthur, and you find Science and Futurism with Issac Arthur on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. It's pretty much the native platform is YouTube. We do videos, and we do them in podcast format too, because it's mostly just an article that we put a visual and audio layer on top of.
Yeah, it's really terrific. I mean, it's you want to exercise your brain. This is the guy. you want to listen to.
About 400 episodes at this point in time, and usually about 20 to 30 minutes long, sometimes longer. And we cover all topics from space colonization to, well, graphene and batteries and power types of supply and aliens. So.
And also, I had another joke I wanted to say, which I may have borrowed from somebody, and I don't remember if I did. It was the idea of time being relative. So, and everyone knows that time just went really fast. Time's going very slow, and all you got to do is talk to an insurance salesman, and time will stand still.
It's a good way to extend the life.
I get a guy to come in once a week just so I can feel like I'm living longer. That's what I say. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I really, really appreciate your time. And I hope that you folks that are listening to this show go to Issac Arthur's show and YouTubes and things. It's really, really a great listen every time I've gone, which is 3. I'll be honest, it's 3, but I'm going to do more. I just met him. So thanks so much, and keep Ohio the way it is.
Thanks for having me on. It was a great time.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to The Exploding Human. Again, theexplodinghuman.com is the website, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman YouTube channel, and The Exploding Human Facebook page, all places you can listen to the show. And again, huge thanks to Issac Arthur, fellow Ohioan. Please check out his YouTube channel, Science and Futurism with Issac Arthur. It's fantastic. Have a beautiful day. Thank you for listening.